Hi everyone, welcome to the second session of Conflicting Not Today, session Hacktoberfest. Tonight we're gonna have two speakers, and this is the first out of four sessions we're gonna run every Tuesday at 5 p.m. We have two speakers tonight. The first one is Marit Van Dijk, and the second one will be Stéphane. We'll start with Marit. Marit is, she's working actually 5 minutes biking from here, but we met in Minsk at JFuture. And she's a software developer at bol.com, and she loves open source. Hi, Marit.
Hi.
Hey there. I think you're going to talk to us tonight about collaborating and Cucumber, right?
Yes.
And I have a question for you before we start. How many pull requests did you make already for Hacktoberfest?
For Hacktoberfest this year, I'm at a whopping 0. I just registered today and made sure that the Cucumber repos are open to accept contributions. And there are some issues with the Hacktoberfest label, so people know where to get started on those.
Okay. So. No further ado, I think I'll just let you start. Enjoy, Marit. See you later.
Thank you. So I'm going to do basically an introductory talk about collaborating on open source. And I'm going to talk about the what, how, and why of open source and collaborating on open source software. My name is Marit Van Dijk, and you can find me on Twitter, GitHub, and Medium. I haven't blogged in a while, but you can find some old posts there. So let's get started. Oh, let me change to the other screen so it responds. So contributing to open source, we're going to discuss why you might want to contribute or why you might not want to or not be able to contribute. I'm going to give lots of examples of what you can contribute, regardless of what your background is, with lots and lots of examples of things that I've contributed in the past. And talk a little bit about how to contribute, but I have to say that the Hacktoberfest site has some really good information on the technicalities of how does a pull request work, etc. So I'm going to link to that as well, and I will post all of my slides on SpeakerDeck afterwards and tweet the link and share it with Julien. So why did I get started with open source? I did the scenic tour to becoming a developer. I've been working in IT for about 20 years, but not always as a developer. So I learned Java at university, and I learned Java 1.2. And then I had to relearn Java around Java 8 a few years ago. And I really wanted to learn new things and learn while doing something that might actually be useful to other people. And I've been doing coding challenges, which is a lot of fun, but they're quite small and not part of a bigger project. So I wanted a bigger project to work on and learn new things. So those were my reasons, but you might have different reasons, like my friend Rien, who is a maintainer for Cucumber JVM. He started because he just wanted to fix one bug or add a feature that he needed. So that's how you might get started. You might do so because you want to build your resume or your portfolio. To network and meet new people. I met Julien and Stéphane both in Minsk because I was doing this talk at JFuture. I met a lot of the Cucumber contributors. And yeah, you get to meet nice people. I mean, this was back when we could travel and the world wasn't literally and figuratively on fire. And you might have other reasons to contribute to open source. There might be reasons you don't contribute to open source. And I realized that it can be scary to get started. And I've seen a really great talk by Eileen Uchitel, which I linked here, about how scary it can be to get started and what if they don't like me, my contributions, or what I'm trying to do. And she's a core contributor to Ruby on Rails. So obviously she got over the hump. And I have to say that finding a project that's welcoming is really, really helpful. You might have other reasons that you cannot contribute. You might have limitations in terms of time or legal limitations. You might not have the time. You might not want to spend time behind a computer outside of work. your employer might not allow you to contribute to open source. At bol.com, we have an open source addendum that allows us to do so. Unfortunately, it happens that people have a bad experience, that they try to do a pull request to a project where their pull request is not appreciated, or people are rude. And I have fortunately not had that experience. And I think I got really lucky and stumbled into a really great community. But I do want to stress that regardless of your experience and your level of experience, there are many, many ways that you can contribute. And I think that a lot of us use open source projects. So it would be nice if some of us also helped to maintain these projects or contribute to them. So I'm going to give lots and lots of examples of things that you can do. My first project that I worked on was Cucumber. And I started on Cucumber because I had just started using it early 2017. And I really liked using it. And I had been looking for a project to work on. And one of the recommendations I'd read is work on something that you like. So I figured this is as good a project as any. Let's get started. And I have to say that I stayed and added more contributions because of the community. In particular, Aslak, who was the creator of Cucumber, Rien on the right, my right, your left, I don't know. MP Korstanje is what it says. Were very helpful, and Björn Rasmussen was also very helpful. Aslak and Björn, when I first started, I had accidentally merged something to master that shouldn't have gotten merged yet because I wasn't as familiar with Git. And I was really mortified and figured, oh, they'll want nothing to do with me. But they were actually really nice about it, and they were very helpful and helped fix that. And I spent the whole weekend doing Git tutorials to make sure that that didn't happen again. And now I'm the person that my teammates go to if they want to do something with Git, even developers who've been writing code and doing development work for longer than I have. So that's pretty cool. And Rien was super helpful in helping me find issues that were good to start with, which is also very helpful. So the most obvious thing that you can contribute is code. So let's talk about some examples. Obviously, you can help fix bugs. Sometimes those are easier to get started with if they are small and somewhat contained and you're not familiar with the whole project yet. One of the first things that I did was fixing a bug. It was suggested by Rien that I pick it up, but it was easy because I could just write a few tests to reproduce the problem, fix the bug, and then see that the test passed and the bug was fixed. You can, of course, add new features if there's something that you want in a project that you're using. Before you get started on new features, though, do check with the project that it's a feature that they want and that your implementation is in line with what they want, because they will have to maintain it. You can refactor. This is a trivial example just to illustrate this point, but rewriting some Kotlin examples to more idiomatic Kotlin. Of course, you can do more complicated refactors than I have, but they don't fit nicely on a slide. My very first pull request to Cucumber JVM was adding tests to show that an issue had been resolved, because I could no longer reproduce it with those tests. So that closed an issue. Another thing that you can do is upgrade dependencies. We use GraphQL at work. And I noticed that they had an older version of Jackson, which is a serialization library on the JVM. And I updated the dependencies because we were getting an old version in our project. And they merged that quite quickly. And it's a tiny thing that you can just do in 15 minutes or so. I do know, because Stéphane, who is next, told me that Spring prefers to update their own dependencies. So you might want to check before you start doing this, whether it's something that they actually want. And another great way to help and also familiarize yourself with the project is by reviewing PRs, because reviewing PRs and accepting PRs also puts pressure on maintainers. So that's where you can help them. But outside of code, there are also lots of things that you can do that you might not realize. So I'm going to give you some examples of those. And also I want to quote this book. It says, "Please don't feel you have nothing to contribute to free and open source software if you aren't a programmer," which is from the book Forge Your Future with Open Source by Vicky Bresser. And it tells you pretty much everything that I'm going to tell you in this talk, minus my personal experience, and a lot more about the background of how open source came to be and the how and why of all of the different things, and also projects that work not the way that Cucumber or other projects that I've worked on work. So the different roles of contributor, maintainer. If you're really interested in open source, or you want to see how it can help you in your career, I really highly recommend this book. So one way that you can help that isn't directly contributing code to a project is by helping the community. Most open source projects have help channels or a community surrounding them of other users that help each other with how to use it or how to fix their problems. So one of the ways that you can help is by answering questions on whatever support channels are available for that project. For Cucumber, we use Slack. There are some old Gitter channels. There's a mailing list. Other projects might use IRC, etc., or Discord. And answering questions can be really helpful. And this is a tweet of a while ago where someone raised an issue in the Cucumber repository on GitHub, but it wasn't a bug or a feature, and we used the issue tracker for bugs and features only. But it was a question, and we asked people to go to the support channels for questions. But I did answer the question because I don't even remember what it was about, and at least the person was thankful for the explanation, even though I had closed their issue. And if you notice that you're answering the same questions a lot, then maybe the documentation on that part isn't clear. So you can consider adding that to the documentation. And I'm going to do a shameless plug here. We have an open issue of several frequently asked questions for Cucumber that we would like to add to the frequently asked questions page. And even partial pull requests, picking one of those questions and adding it would be really, really helpful. So there's a great way to get started on your Hacktoberfest contributions. And also, in general, there are lots and lots of things that you can do to help the documentation, because having good documentation is one of the things that helps the adoption of a project. Unfortunately, not a lot of people are actually writing the documentation. And today we made sure that the Cucumber projects are open to accept Hacktoberfest contributions, and we marked some with the Hacktoberfest label, and you can find the documentation issues under this link. So the many things that you can do for documentation, one is, of course, add information that is missing. So if you notice, hey, I have this problem, I don't know how to solve it, I can't find it in the documentation, you ask the community, they explain it to you, you understand it now, write it down and add it to the documentation. And I have several examples. One is I was doing a Spring tutorial, and while I was doing the tutorial, I found that one tiny step was missing. And I was able to figure that out, but I figured whoever is doing this next might have the same question and the same confusion. So I added like a little tiny bit to the tutorial, and it was accepted, I think, the next day or rather quickly. So that was pretty cool. And I've added a lot of stuff to the Cucumber documentation, one of which was a page that describes testable architecture based on a talk by Aslak, the creator of Cucumber. And he gave me this feedback, which I'm saving for my Bragg file. Of course, you can edit or clarify a lot of the documentation. Not everyone is equally good at understanding things and being able to clearly express them. And one of my favorite pull requests that we received on the Cucumber docs was this one by Carol Strand, which was on inclusive language. And we tend to say, you just simply do this or just do that, because we don't think it's difficult and we want to convey that you can do it too. But if you're frustrated or stuck or you don't know how to do it, that can sound like you're stupid, or you might feel like you're stupid just because it says simply, but you don't know how to simply do that. So I really loved her going over the documentation and improving it in that respect. I wasn't aware that we were doing that. So that was a great contribution. Minor things, fixing typos. Now I know that the rules for Hacktoberfest this year are really geared towards quality. So make sure to not just fix one typo in multiple commits or multiple pull requests, but on the other hand, if it really helps, I find it useful if people fix typos on the Cucumber documentation. And I fixed, for instance, a typo on PyTest, which is a mutation testing library for Java that I was playing around with, and there was a typo in one of the error messages. And I don't know, typos just bug me, so I figured why not fix it. Again, that takes like 15 minutes or so, including cloning the project, forking it, etc. But we'll discuss that later. I fixed dead links in the documentation for Docker when I was reading it and found a dead link. And another helpful thing is to review PRs. Whenever I do a PR to the Cucumber documentation, usually Olle, within a day, and I've never met Olle, but I really appreciate Olle, will do a review. And, you know, even though I try to do my best and explain things the best way I can, someone who reads it finds like little things to improve it even more. And I really love that part of the collaboration, of making something better. It's the same at work when your coworkers review your code and find little things to improve. And you can learn from that, and that's great. You can also help restructure documentation, which is another thing that we are going to work on for the Cucumber documentation, because it can use some help in that area. Another thing that you can contribute that isn't code is issues. That might sound a bit counterintuitive, but as a maintainer, you don't always know what's wrong, or for Cucumber, for example, you can use it with lots and lots of other tools in combinations that not all of the maintainers and contributors use it with, or in ways that they don't use it. So if you find an issue, that can be really helpful, so that people are at least aware of that and can fix it, or you can help them fix it. So when you report issues, you might want to ask if you're not sure that it is in fact a bug or an issue or a feature that they might want. And you want to check that it's not already reported, and make sure that you don't create a duplicate. Also, just like any bug report or feature request, provide all of the relevant information. And GitHub provides the possibility to use a template or add a template to the project, which will describe what the maintainers want in terms of information in order to help you with your issue. If the project doesn't use a template, that might be something that you can do if the project would like to have one, is add a template to the project. And you might be asked to create a minimal, complete, verifiable example if they cannot reproduce your problem, or they need to know exactly where it goes wrong. You can help analyze issues that other people have reported if there's no progress or the maintainers need more information. It can be really helpful to be able to reproduce an issue or narrow down how to reproduce it. Add that information or add tests that reproduce the issue. Speaking of tests, testing is also needed. And there are different things that you can test. You can test bug fixes to see that the bug is actually fixed, especially if it's your bug. You can test new features, which is something that I've done in the past for Cucumber when we were adding, or actually when they were adding Cucumber expressions. I tried them out and see what worked, what didn't, also what my expectations were on how they would work and what didn't, and what we should add to the documentation. You can test new releases. I try to keep the projects at work that use Cucumber up to date with the latest versions to at least see that everything still works and discuss with the team if I find anything. And not so much testing as proofreading, documentation and tutorials can be really helpful, because especially a tutorial, you need to make sure that all of the steps are correct and none of the information is missing. Documentation, I might understand what I'm trying to convey, but I don't know if people who are reading it will understand. And there are many, many other roles that are needed, like design. As you can tell from my slide design, I'm not a front-ender. I cannot design my way out of a paper bag, but other people can. So lots of projects might be needing help in that area. I have a friend who's a product owner for a part of Eclipse IDE, and there are many, many other things that you can do. And there's lots of examples also in the book I mentioned. And if you don't know, but you really want to help a project out, ask, because often there are things that maintainers or other contributors are thinking, oh, it would be nice to do this, but they just haven't gotten around to creating an issue for it, or it might not really be a bug or a feature, just like a nice to have thing. Usually there's plenty to do. But if you don't have the time, which, is valid, I also recently haven't spent as much time on open source as I would like, because I have other hobbies and life and the state of the world in general. But be aware that a lot of projects run on volunteers. There are projects where people get paid to work on them, but a lot of projects work on volunteers, and that's people like you and me who do this stuff on their own time. So at the very least, be nice. And if you appreciate their work, then let them know. And these are some examples. Benjamin is the one who writes a report on top of Cucumber JVM, who's praising the work on there, and some other people on Twitter who are saying, appreciate open source maintainers. You might not be aware, but you or your employer who is benefiting from these projects can donate money, and there are different ways, and it depends on the project. Cucumber uses Open Collective. I know that Selenium uses the Software Freedom Conservancy. I know that Sam Aaron, who built Sonic Pi, uses Patreon, and some other people use Patreon. There's Tidelift, which I think takes contributions and then distributes it over different projects. But money isn't everything without people to do the work. And that's what Hacktoberfest is all about, is to get more people to chip in and help out. And there's a really great talk by Heather Miller about the sustainability or lack thereof of open source projects that I really recommend. So how to get started? You'll need to find a project. For me, I would really recommend working on a project that you actually use, because it'll be something that you care about and you're already at least somewhat familiar with, even if it's just as a user. But if you don't have such a project, I copied this from the Hacktoberfest website. There are lots of projects or repositories that share and curate tasks that are, can't think of the word, suitable for beginners, that you can take a look at and see if there's a task that's something that you can do. There are lots of things also listed on the Hacktoberfest website. There are plenty of ways to find something, even if you don't have a particular project that you want to work on. When you find a task or a project, you will need to check how to contribute to that project. And there are several documents to look for. There's the README, which will hopefully describe something about what the project is for and how to get started with it and or how to get started contributing to it. Another file to look for is the contributing MD, or it can also be called hacking. And of course, one of the things that makes it an open source project is the license, which tells how you're allowed to use it and how you're allowed to incorporate it into other things. And you want to make sure that whatever the license is for the project that you're going to contribute to is something that you agree with. There might be a code of conduct, which unfortunately is very important if you're not a white male, or neither of those things, because it does happen that people aren't as nice or inclusive. And there might be style guides on how what your code should look like, or how you want to write your documentation, or things like that, and take all of that into account when doing your contribution. Some projects have a contributor license agreement, which is basically a contract that you sign saying, I'm allowed to transfer the intellectual property of my contributions to the project, which is something that they would need, because otherwise they might get into trouble. And if you cannot find any of this information, it might not be the best project for a beginner to get started on, unless you really want to help them sort this stuff out and write it down. But if it's a project that you care about and you want to contribute and you cannot find any of this information, then just ask the other contributors and maintainers, hey, I'd like to help out. What can I do? How do I get started? And hopefully someone will help you. How to create a pull request is explained in the video on the Hacktoberfest website. You'll need to pick a task, which can be either something that you find in the project that you want to work on, or through all of the projects that curate tasks for beginners. A task you could do might be that you solve your own problem, as I've discussed before. Or you might look for something that is marked good first issue, help wanted, or if you want to get one of the spiffy t-shirts this year, or plant a tree, which is a great alternative, look for one that's marked Hacktoberfest. And again, if you don't know, ask what you can do. You might need to set up your environment, depending on whether you have a developer environment already set up on your machine. So you might need Git or another version control system. You need a programming environment like an IDE, or for Java, you need JDK. You might need a package manager, depending on your language. You will need to fork and clone the project, which is also explained in the video I just linked. Basically meaning you take a copy of the project to your profile and then download it to your machine so that you can work on it. I also highly recommend seeing if you can actually build the project, both for open source and work. Make sure that it works before you start fiddling with it, because otherwise if it breaks, you don't know whether it was you that broke it. And that can take a lot of time to figure out. And if you cannot build it, ask. And if there's any information missing from the documentation regarding how to build the project, add that to the documentation to make it easier for the next person to come along. And then comes the best part, which is collaborate. So if you're going to open your first PR, you might want to discuss your intentions. You might want to say, hey, I would like to add this feature. Is that something that you want? If you want it, how should I implement it? Or, I'm thinking of this. Do you agree? I would like to fix this bug. I would like to fix it in this way. That way you prevent putting a lot of effort and time into something that is not going to get accepted, and make sure that your fix or contribution will align with what the project wants. And also it can help, okay, I would like to take this bug so that not everyone is working on the same thing. Again, wasting time and effort. Of course, you'll be working on your contribution. There's no rule that says you cannot ask questions as you're working on it. So, communication is key. And at some point, hopefully you'll be ready for feedback and you will submit a new pull request. And you will hopefully receive feedback on your pull request and iterate, depending, of course, on how complex your contribution is. And also, hopefully, people will be nice in the feedback, and you will be nice in receiving the feedback, and you will collaborate and iterate on your contribution and make it better. And at the end, hopefully, your contribution will be accepted. This was my very first pull request, I think. So that's how long I've been doing open source. Unfortunately, it might also get declined. And a quote here is from Jesse Frizzell: "No is temporary, yes is forever." If they accept the feature that you're submitting, they will have to maintain that. And if it's not in line with the vision of the product, or it's too complicated, or whatever reason that they have, they might reject it, which is why, like I said in the first slide, or the slide before, you want to discuss with them what you're going to do before you actually do it. And again, during the whole process, ask questions, communicate your intentions, because that way you'll get the most bang for your buck, or effort in this case. So hopefully I've shown that contributing to open source doesn't have to take a lot of time or programming skill, because there are some things that are really small that you can do in maybe 15 minutes. If you want to contribute, but you don't know how, ask the community what you can do. Tell them, hey, I have this background or this skill. How can I help your project with this? And please go and collaborate. Thank you.
Thanks, Marit. Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, I know how difficult it is to present to a screen, right? You don't see anyone,
Yes.
You have absolutely no feedback. So I really appreciate that you take the time. It's I was there watching. I don't know if you've seen, but
I did not see you. I do miss having an actual crowd and feedback. So I just switched to the comment section. I hope they're being
okay.
nice.
A few things. I think we have one question, and it's quite long. So for time for you to read it, then I do have a comment about something else. One of the persons is talking about a mentoring solution, and I don't know if you were there on Friday, but the folks from contributing.today, and especially someone at GitHub, was mentioning that some projects during Hacktoberfest offer one-on-one mentoring for people that want to start, and I think Gatsby, it's one of the projects doing that.
I wasn't aware.
No, it was for team in the comments. Did you have time to read the question yet?
Here, maybe if it would work in on collaborative development, maybe mentoring is something that needs attention. Yeah, so for me, I got really lucky in that Rien took the time to help me find the issues that were good to start with, and helped me on how to fix them, etc. But that is taking time from maintainers to maintain the project. So yeah, I don't think we have like a formal way of doing mentoring, but Cucumber has a Slack, which has a committers channel. So if you're interested in contributing, that would be the place to go.
I think maybe we can ask Stéphane the same question, because he's working full time on Spring. So
I know that they have also curated their first issues.
Yep. And there was one other question about skipping the Git CLI altogether for newcomers and using only the Git UI tool. And the question is is it good for starting, or do you think it's good also to learn Git at the same time?
I think it's useful to learn Git if you're going to work with code, either as a developer or a test engineer or in any capacity, if that's the version control system that you're using, because I know companies still use SVN or what is it, Mercurial? I don't know. So, and I think having a basic understanding of Git will help regardless of how you interact with Git. I don't have any experience with the GitHub UI or doing a PR straight from the GitHub UI. I don't think. So I'm not exactly sure what they mean.
Yeah, I think if you go on a project, if you see a typo in the documentation, you can just click edit. It's going to automatically fork, and then it brings you to a UI. So you can actually skip the whole the whole flow if you want to.
That might also.
You want to go up on screens here, Stéphane? No.
It might also depend on how complex the project is, because if you, of course, fork and clone the project to your machine, you have your whole IDE, which can help you build the project, run the tests, make sure you didn't break anything. So yes, if you're only fixing a typo in the README, you could do that directly, or you might be able to do that directly in GitHub. If you're going to change code and make sure that it works, I personally wouldn't do that.
All right.
I don't know if that helps.
I have a question of my own. I was looking for projects for Hacktoberfest myself, and I find it quite difficult. Maybe do you have tips? Because if you look at the Explorer, for example, from GitHub, or if you look at the recommended projects, those are usually very big projects. I mean, I'm taking Spring as an example. Maybe Stéphane will help us later. But you have flocks of people trying to help there. I usually try to find smaller to medium projects where the number of contributors is lower. Do you have tips on how to find those projects, maybe that are searching for contributors that will not appear in the top rankings of any kind of GitHub page?
I have the same problem, because if I go to the GitHub website or the Hacktoberfest website, there are so many projects that I'm not familiar with. So, for me, what worked was find a project that you use and see if they are open to contributions, and see what you can do, and see if they have issues that are marked Hacktoberfest or good first issue, or things like that. And you might have to try a few before you find one. I know a few on the JVM and that need documentation contributions. So
you can share them around. I'll pass them and try them out myself as well.
I'm talking about Cucumber. I have the links in the slides already, and I'm sure Stéphane will mention it. But I know that Spring has a list of good first issues, because they're also, of course, looking for new maintainers.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Marit. I think we don't have any other questions.
I think I saw another question.
Tell me, which one?
From Jeroen Heijmans again. Curious to hear your experience. How different is collaborating on PRs between a work situation via or versus open source? Actually, I find that working on open source and collaborating on open source transfers to how I want to work at work, which is collaborating with people and making things better and learning from each other and appreciating people's different backgrounds and what they bring to a team. But before COVID, a team would often be co-located. So it's easier to ask questions or to pair on something, whereas open source is more distributed, and not only in terms of physical location, but also in terms of time zones. So before merging stuff, you might always want to leave at least 24 hours to have people around the world, or give people around the world a chance to take a look at that. So yeah, the location distribution and the time distribution is different. But other than that, I think it's a transferable skill.
Okay. Thanks, Marit. I think we're gonna leave. Yeah, that was really nice having you. Let me find the question.
In real life.
And yeah, hoping to see you again in the flesh soon.
Who knows?
All right. Bye, Marit.
Bye.
Okay, the next speaker you already know is going to be Stéphane Nicoll. Stéphane Nicoll I also happened to have met in Minsk at JFuture last year. And the funny thing is, and that's kind of why I asked them to be on the same day, is they were doing a joint talk at Spring One. You're going to tell me, Stéphane, has it been cancelled or not? The Spring with Marit? Did it happen?
Yeah, so it was supposed to be in May at Spring I/O Barcelona, and they moved it to an online event, moving the conference to October. But then the conference was cancelled.
Right, cancelled. Okay, well, you have chance to be virtually together for a minute here. Thanks for being there. You're gonna introduce us to Spring Boot and start Spring I/O. And I'm not gonna say much about it because you're gonna do it. So I think I'll just leave you the stage. Thanks for being here, and I'll be backstage if you need me.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Okay, so hello everyone. So my name is Stéphane Nicoll. I'm working on the Spring Boot project, and I'm also the lead of StartupSpring.io that you can see right now. It's a way to get started with Spring. So very quickly introducing the project, and then we'll move to what you've been looking for here today is how you can contribute with some practical examples there. So Spring is an application development platform on the JVM. Spring Boot in particular is your entry point to build an application with Spring. So if you go to StartupSpring.io, you see that you can get started quite easily selecting the language on the JVM you want to use, your favorite build system, some info about your project. Then you can select a number of dependencies to whatever use case you have to implement. And the thing that's quite unique, or at least what we introduced in the ecosystem, is the concept of auto configuration. So it's a way for the application to react to choices that you've made, so dependencies you've added to the project. So for instance, if I type web, so I'm basically opting for a web application. So I'm going to build a web application, and I'm adding something that allows me to monitor and manage my application. It's a concept in Spring Boot that's called the actuator. If I'm adding those, Spring Boot will react to the fact that they've been added as dependencies, and it will configure things for you if you haven't expressed any opinion. So let's generate a project, and let's open that quickly in my IDE. So this is the empty project that you get from StartupSpring.io based on my choices there. So I can see I'll get back my 2 entries that I've selected. We call that starter in Spring Boot. So it's a way to group dependencies that are that basically provide a feature. And there is not much to it really, right? It's an empty application. Because it's a web application, we added some directories automatically for you for static resources and templates if you choose to use that. An empty configuration file, and there's also a skeleton test that basically you need to fill in or implement whatever your application is doing. So if I run this app, Spring Boot, it's like running a main. The simplest thing you could do in Java. That's actually going to bootstrap the container, and you'll get a web application running. So because you've opted for the web starter, it will basically bring up a Tomcat server in this case. And looking at some endpoint here, you can see that some default services have been created. Okay, so Spring Boot there's a lot of things to learn about the project if you're interested, if you're working on the JVM, if you want to give it a try. So now I'm just going to focus more on contributing to the project and basically try to provide an example to what Marit already explained in the previous session. So to get started, Spring Boot is on GitHub. So if you Google it, if you Google Spring Boot, it's probably one of the top hits. It's in the Spring Projects organization. If you look at this project, you'll see that there is a number of resources in the home directory you'll find. in the README, you'll get some help to get started with the project, and where you can find documentation, where you can submit issues. So that's, if you're new to the project, that's usually a good place to start, because not all projects work the same way, as Marit explained. So, for instance, some projects don't mind if you ask questions in the issue tracker, and others prefer that you use a dedicated tool for that. So, for instance, in our case, we prefer to use a Stack Overflow for questions, and we also have a Gitter channel. I'll come back to that in a minute. So if you want support, there is a dedicated tool for that, and the issue tracker is not the right place to do so. So one of these resources is contributing. You'll find the same file pretty much everywhere in the Spring organization. So if you go to, for instance, Spring Security or Spring Data or Spring Framework even, which is the core framework, the lower level part of Spring Boot, or any Spring project really, we try to follow the same conventions. So you'll find a contributing page where you'll get some information that are specific to the project, like how is there any code convention? So is there any pattern that we use to format the code, or is there something that we look at, or something that we prefer to do in a certain way? So in the case of Spring Boot, we try to automate as much as we can. So we have both a check style config, which will check the code and fail the build if there are some rules that are violated. And we also have a format plugin, which formats the code in a consistent manner. So if you run the build, all those will be applied automatically, and you'll get some report if there is some issue in the code that you've changed. The contributing page will also have some information for you to build a project, to open a project in your IDE, because those tools need to be configured. So in the case of the format plugin, for instance, we also have a plugin for Eclipse, IntelliJ IDE, and NetBeans, I believe, or maybe not. I don't remember now. No, I think it's on the IntelliJ IDE and Eclipse. So if you use any of those, that page will explain where you can find the plugin, how to install it, etc., etc. So this is really your place to look at before you start actually submitting your first pull request, because depending on the nature of your contribution, you'll find some interesting resource. And if you're stuck, or if you need help, or if you need support, there's also a standard page in pretty much every Spring project called support, and that page will tell you where you can get support, basically. So as I've mentioned, in the case of Spring, it's mostly Stack Overflow for questions. And we also have a Gitter channel, so in case you don't know Gitter, gitter.im, it's a way to basically build a chat room for a GitHub repository, pretty much. And there's all other integration, but that's how we use it. So if you go to Spring Project/Spring Boot, which you'll find the link in the README in the support page, then you can get any questions and talk to the community. And the nice part about this is answers to questions are not only from maintainers, but anybody actually using Spring Boot, people that are connected, can answer you live. It's a different way to interact with the community. All right, so let's go with actually simulate what would happen if you contribute a pull request. And as Marit also mentioned, before you start going with something a bit more involved, it's better to talk to the team first, because you may spend significant time, and actually turns out that this is something that we don't want to add to the project, or that we prefer to be done differently. So one thing that we use is something in GitHub called GitHub templates, where whenever you create an issue and a pull request, as I'll show in a minute, you'll get some help, basically. So typically telling you Do not raise an issue if that's a question, if you're reporting a security vulnerability, because we have a separate channel to report that responsibly. As Marit mentioned in her session, don't open an issue for dependency upgrades, because we do that. We prefer to do that ourselves. So all that is basically explained here. So while preparing this session, I've actually found a typo somewhere. Let me try to find it back. There we go. So there is a typo here where IntelliJ is spelled with a capital I at the end, and it shouldn't be. The last G should be a capital I, but not I. So it's from the contributing ad-hoc page. I could obviously update directly from the GitHub API, but let's do the long run here and showcase what you need to do. So the first thing you need to do, you go to the project and you click fork here, and then you choose your account. As you can see on my personal account, I already forked the project, so I don't need to do anything. It's already forked. So this is my project. Once you fork the project, you can either clone your fork, or better yet, clone the actual project itself. So to clone it, you go back here, you click on code, and there is some URI here. You copy it, and then you type git. You go to some random directory, or let me increase the font here. You type git clone and the URI, and that's going to create, in this case, a directory called Spring Boot with the project. I've already done that. The first thing I need to do is just make sure I'm up to date with master. In this case, the pull request I'm about to submit is very, very simple. So it's not like you're changing a lot of code, but if you're changing code and that code has changed in the meantime, you'll get some merge conflict. So try to avoid that as much as you can. The other thing that's is something that often newcomers don't do is make sure you create a branch for your submission, because if you don't create a branch and you submit your pull request off your view of master, if you try to be up to date with master because it has evolved, so potentially your change has not been merged yet, you may actually automatically close your pull request if you try to reset, for instance, your view of master. So make sure that you create a branch first. So I've created my branch. I go to whatever thing I need to do, whatever business I need to do to my branch. There we go. So this is the problem here. It's a typo, and the usual Git stuff. We have no change now. You can make sure everything is square. And then the next step is you need to push that change somewhere, but you can't push it to the main repository because as a new contributor, you don't have access rights to it. So you need to push that on your fork. So that's the main reason why you forked it. So let me go back there. Okay. It'll be easier if I tap it here. Okay, so this is my fork. I do the same thing. I basically take the URI of my fork, and then I'm going to add a remote to it. So to do that, to add an extra repository basically to your repo, you use the remote command with the add option. Then you give it a symbolic name and your the URI of your remote. So now you can basically pull and push from origin if you have the rights, and pull and push from Nicoll. So I'm going to push to Nicoll this time, and basically giving my branch. So that's basically pushing my change to GitHub so that I can actually create a pull request. You can see in this case that GitHub also hint me as, oh, do you want to create a pull request for this? So you could click on this link. That's going to create a pull request for you, but I'm going to show you how you can also do that from the web UI. So if you go back to your project here, you'll get this thing. Otherwise, what you can also do is browse to the branch, and basically you'll have an option to create a pull request. So clicking this is basically the same thing as clicking this link. So I'm opening a pull request in Spring Boot. Notice that the organization has changed. Also, something that we see is people trying to play with pull requests, and they don't realize that they're actually going to create a pull request in the main repository, not in their repository. So whenever you hit the create pull request, you're basically leaving your fork and you go back to the main repo. And you can see that because the context here has changed. So again, same thing, you're about to submit a pull request, and we've given you some hints, like if you're trying to fix a security vulnerability, or if you're trying to update a dependency, please stop, because we don't accept those. And then you can double check. Actually, you can't. Yes, you can. You can double check here that you've done what you were supposed to do. So there you go. You've submitted your first pull request. I guess I'm happy to answer questions now.
We do have a few, actually.
Okay. Let's go.
Let's see. I'm going to remove your screen. Thank you. I have a question first. You showed the whole flow for creating pull. I'll show your screen again, maybe. Can you explain in the list of issues, if I wanted to help and before creating a pull request, what would be a good way to find issues that are welcoming newcomers?
Yes.
And I already have a precise.
Yep. I forgot to actually show that. You're right. So in any project, each project in GitHub has this notion of labels, which different projects use differently. So if you click on issues, you'll get a bunch of issues here. Then you have this label thing on the right-hand side. So if you click on that, you'll find some that usually they have the same patterns, like help wanted or good first user or something like that. What we use ourselves is first timers only. So let me actually increase the font a bit here. First timers only, for which we really craft the issue in such a way that someone that never contributed to open source can contribute. And ideal for contribution, which is something that's not crafted in a way that will go step by step with you, but rather the issue itself feels like small enough so that someone who did not contribute to the project yet can contribute. So if we click on the first timer, we don't have at the moment, but let's have a look to, I don't know, this one, for instance, just to say something. We have this template that we fill, where we basically giving you as much detail as we can. What's the problem? What's the solution? So we're actually telling you what you need to do, and we're telling you where you need to change the code and why you need to change the code. And then you have some steps to fix it. And usually we prefer to keep those issues for minorities. So group with minorities, we prefer to make sure that those folks get a chance to contribute. And the ideal for contribution, we have 4 at the moment. So if you want to get started, feel free to have a look to that.
All right, thanks. I really like, I see you tweet about that sometimes, and I really like it. You take like a whole lot of, great amount of effort to really help someone. So I appreciate it a lot. Let's go to the question from the audience first. Jeroen, do I let you read it, or do you want me to read it for you? Yeah.
No, I can read it. That's fine. Thank you. So since it can be daunting even for seasoned devs to build and run tests for a large project like this, it might become an obstacle for contributing. Any tips for maintainers around this? I guess that was from or for? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's asking how maintainers can handle.
So
can help contributors in that way.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So one thing is for Spring Boot, I can only answer for Spring Boot. Happy to have a discussion outside of the boundaries of Spring Boot. But what we have now is we use Gradle with Gradle Cache and Gradle Enterprise. So basically we whenever a certain state of the project has been built, the result is pushed on a shared repo. And when you, as a user, you build, you get a chance to download that rather than compiling everything and testing everything. So essentially, when you run the build, you're very much likely to only run a small portion of it because some stuff in your cache are not up to date. So of course, if you contribute one every 2 months on the project, you won't get the same benefit as we do because we build like multiple times a day. But me, when my cache is fresh, is up to date, sorry. Basically run the build, and sometimes the build takes like 30 seconds to run everything because Gradle has noticed that I only change that file, and that file has an impact only on those things. And it will only rebuild that and only run the test for that. That being said, ignoring that, we don't expect a contributor to run the full build, right? If you're changing a class and that class has dedicated tests in a certain package, it would be nice at least to run those tests, and that would be a good thing. And for that, both Gradle and Maven have options. So Gradle has a -- test where you can provide a pattern, which is something I'm using all the time. I even have an alias for that. So I have an alias called check. And check is going to run Gradle with the check style and the formatting check. And the argument that I provide is a pattern for test, and it's only going to run the test that matches the pattern. If you use Maven, you can type ambient test -d test equals, and then put a pattern and make sure to quote it, because if you put a star, it will go sideways with bash. And that, again, will basically run a regular expression on your test and only run those.
And I'm guessing you always have CI afterwards, right? When you create your pull request.
Yeah, so yeah.
You will have visual.
Okay, from a maintainer's perspective, this is something personally that I don't like, is someone actually writing some code and then pushing that and submitting the pull request and waiting for our CI to tell them if they screw up something. Because it's actually, the reason why it annoys me is because it's a very practical detail. Spring Boot has 3,000 watchers, and every time you push a commit, you'll basically GitHub is sending an email to 3,000 people. So in order to reduce the noise in notifications, I think it's better.
I thought we were going to talk about the computing time, but you're actually talking about basically spamming users. Okay, or spamming contributors in that case. Okay, interesting. Thanks. Let's see. Rakesh has a few questions. Do you have separate branch with feature in Pivotal, or do you commit all the code directly to GitHub?
So just practically, but Pivotal does not exist anymore. The Spring team now is at VMware. Just practical detail for you to know. We don't have private branches, no. So everything, absolutely everything we do is open source. There is no private secret Spring Boot thing at this time.
Okay, let me go back to the comments. Next, shoot. Oh, FS and DS. Do you have any clue what that might mean? I don't. I'll come back to the question if you write exactly what FS and DS means, Rakesh. And I'll go to your next question directly. Oh, that's a more specific question to Spring Boot.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So we don't have like an extended documentation to tell contributors this is how that thing is architectured, and that thing is calling that thing, and this is important for those and those reasons. And the main reason for that is because our specification is the code and the test that goes with it. And writing documents like this would be a huge amount of work for us. And it would very easily be outdated. So we have design documents on the wiki when we're discussing about which is public, like everything else. When we're discussing about a feature and we're not sure about which way we need to go. Or when we're doing spikes, we usually post the spike on the wiki as well, so that others can find it. You won't get a reference documentation for contributors. This is really a lot of work. The reference guide alone is like a ton of work in its own. So yeah, I'm afraid we don't have that.
Okay. I think that answers your second question as well, Rakesh. Rakesh was talking about functional specifications and design specifications.
No, we don't have that.
That's interesting answer. I like it. My architect will like it a bit less, I guess. I do have a last question for you, which is a little of a sidetrack, I guess. But how do you manage your way into working full-time for open source? And that goes back a bit to the question for Marit earlier. Did you start as a contributor and then moved your way into Pivotal, or did you have another path?
Yeah, I guess so. It's a complex question. There is many ways to see how it went, and I'm not entirely sure I have the answer to that. But I've started to contribute to Maven in 2002, I believe. That was Maven 1 and XML, and annotation processor generating other annotations. That kind of nightmare. XDoclet at the time, for those who are old enough to remember that stuff.
That's like one generation too old for me. Came after that.
So yeah, when it was the time of the 8GB and you have to create the local and the remote interface, you had like class with annotation that would actually implement those things, because it was really a lot of boilerplate. So you had something that reads annotation that would generate code, and that code would be compiled and generate some more annotations. Nothing to do with Maven, but I already contributed to that.
Sounds interesting.
It wasn't. So I contributed to Maven 1, then I switched to Maven 2, then I started to, at work, we started to work a bit on Spring, because we had the batch framework. So we decided to rewrite our infrastructure using Spring Batch. And at the time, there were a number of features missing, because Spring Batch was really rising. It wasn't like the mature projects that we know today. So one thing they didn't have, for instance, is a way to run partitions on a cluster. Cluster, I know we don't talk about that anymore, but at the time it was a big thing. And because our infrastructure was distributed, we really needed that feature. So we basically moved our implementation from our homemade framework to Spring Batch. And I've started to contribute that way.
Okay.
Yeah. It
so
took years
from
my team. I mean, I was like contributing for years before I joined the Spring Framework team 6 years ago.
All right. Thanks a lot, Stéphane. I think I really appreciate you also taking the time to come at the end of the day and speak to a screen, basically.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I think you've got a message. We do have a Discord. I posted a comment in there. So if you want to join, we'll be there to help you. There is a few Java folks in the Discord, so we'll be there. And if you want to contribute to Spring Boot or start to Spring.io, he showed you already the way. Thanks for your time, Stéphane. I think we're going to wrap up.
Pleasure.
And, enjoy your evening. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.